The day the sky fell. This is the wooded area there on Woodville Pike where the DC-9 impacted. That's, I think, Dr. B.R. Frederick, who was the county coroner at the time, and with law enforcement officials. You'll notice the trees are pretty much intact, standing up. That the plane did not come in at an angle. Basically, it fell straight into the ground. There is another view. There was a large crater, probably 10 to 12 feet. Joe, when you say the impact was 10 or 12 foot crater of the TWA plane, very little, the motors were, the jets were buried in the crater. Very few parts of the plane were visible. The tail section and part of the wings were the largest part of the TWA DC-9 that was visible the day of the accident. They're a young-looking sheriff, 24 years old, 100 pounds lighter. The fire chief in the white coat was Chief Eugene Brandstetter of the Banner Fire Division. 2 lieutenants from the State Highway Patrol out of the Pickwood Post, the district headquarters. We were discussing plans to start securing the scene there that morning. Transworld Airline flight number 553 was a Douglas McDonnell DC-9 jet airliner operated by Transworld Airlines in American airspace en route from Pittsburgh to Dayton. While descending towards Dayton, about 29 miles from the airport, the flight collided in midair with a twin-engine Beechcraft Baron near Urbana. It was up in Concord Township. All 25 people on board of the DC-9 were killed, 21 passengers and a crew of 4, as well as the pilot of the twin-engine Beech. He was the only occupant in the small plane. Flight 533 departed from the greater Pittsburgh Airport en route to Dayton Municipal Airport. After passing through Columbus Air Terminal Control, Flight 533 had been cleared to descend from flight level 20,000 feet to 3,000 feet for their approach into Dayton. The flight was in uncontrolled airspace, but being handled by Dayton Radar Approach Control. Control advised them that an uncontrolled VFR traffic ahead and slightly to the right and 1 mile away about 18 seconds before the collision. The crew of the TWA acknowledged the traffic advisor. As the plane descended through 4,500 feet at a speed of 323 miles an hour knots on a southwest heading, it collided with the plane. The right front side of the DC-9 impacted the left side of the Beechcraft. Both aircraft fell to the earth in Concord Township near the intersection of Wesley Chapel Road and State Route 29. The debris field was very extensive, from a field just south of Wesley Chapel Road to where the TWA impacted on north side of Woodville Pike. The cause of the accidents says visual flight rules, which is VFR, were in effect at the time of the accident, meaning it was the responsibility of the pilots of both aircraft to see and avoid each other. In addition, the radar controller stated that he did not see the Beechcraft on his radar scope until 22 seconds before the crash. Controllers testified that the zone near the crash site was a zone where small planes could be difficult to detect on radar, but flight checks in the area proved inconclusive. The National Transportation Safety Board investigated the accident and determined that due to the high rate of descent of the DC-9, its pilots were not able to see the other plane in time to avoid the collision. Weather conditions included widely scattered thin clouds with hazing, reducing visibility to 6 to 10 miles, twice the 3-mile visual limit required for VFR flight. So that's just a little background about the plane. It shows there where the Beechcraft crash site was. and then the DC-9 crash site there on Woodville Pike. The call came into the sheriff's office. Hundreds of calls came into the sheriff's office in the matter of the next few hours. A little background, I think it was between 11:30 and 12 on that day that we received the call from numerous people. The Urbana Fire Division notified us and people in the area. But back in 1967, the sheriff's office had one phone line, 653-4645. I remember the number, Sheriff. And the jail number, 653-4645. My wife, Judy, stand up, Judy. She was the jail cook and my matron. She was getting the meal ready for the prisoners, and this happened, and she wound up having to help Catherine Butcher, some of you may remember Catherine, answer the phone. As soon as they hung the phone up, either line, it started ringing. And that went on for hours and hours and hours. So we got the call. I think back in 1967, I might have had 4, maybe 5 deputies. 49 years ago, I don't remember everything. But at my age, I have trouble remembering what happened last week. But we responded thinking that we had maybe survivors of this crash. We didn't know. But once we arrived at the scene, it was very apparent there were no survivors. So instead of having a rescue and recovery, it then became a containment and traffic control and the recovery of the human remains. Fire departments from West Liberty, Adams Township, St. Paris, Johnson Township, Urbana, and Box 13 all responded. There was some fire there at the scene. A very strong smell of aviation fuel. Sometimes I think I can still smell that from that day, but it was very apparent, strong odor of that. There were no survivors. As I mentioned, there was a total of 26 people that passed away. And rumor has it bodies were hanging from the trees. That's not true. There were no bodies. And I don't want to sound too graphic, but when that plane hit on impact, the bodies disintegrated. There was pieces. There was no torsos completely intact, and it was a complete destruction. So our immediate problem, of course, was with traffic. Once we saw there wasn't any survivors, there was no real urgency to take care of the site itself and to secure it. But even back in 1967, the traffic was unreal. They're called spectators. And our immediate concern was to block off Church Road and Woodville Pike, Kaiser Road and Woodville Pike. Those were the closest 2 intersections. And the TWA flight was in between those 2 intersections. We had put in a call for assistance from other counties, adjoining counties, who had very graciously sent people in to help us. The Champaign County Engineer's Office and Concord Township helped us with road close signs, detour signs, those kind of traffic signs that we needed to have to help secure the scene. Once everything was secured, the lieutenants from the Highway Patrol and myself met. We decided with their additional manpower that they had and their expertise in aircraft investigations, they would take care of identifying the pieces of the body and securing the crash site itself. We took care of all the traffic details. I guess we lucked out on that one. Dr. V.R. Frederick, our counter coroner, was in charge of taking care of the remains. A temporary morgue was established back then, which was the High National Guard Armory on North Main Street. And I guess maybe we were a little lucky. 10 days earlier, there was a plane crash up in Hardin County, and the FBI's disaster identification team was still at the site of that airplane crash. They came down to take over the identification of the remains. All the funeral homes in the area, I know Dan Walters, Mike Melvin,
Jim Harvey.
and Jim Harvey,
Harvey's funeral home, yeah.
Lo Wickham from St. Paris, Don Skillman from Mechanicsburg, and Jim Freshwater from North Listburg, and I think John Adkins was associated with Low at that time. I'm not really sure. I can't remember. It's been too many years ago.
Nelson.
But they all helped.
Nelson Hofstetter was involved in that very deeply too.
Hofstetter Funeral Home. Okay. See, I don't remember. Rick, he's from there. He knows. But they were very instrumental in getting the remains removed and taken to the armory for identification. Now, can you imagine trying to identify 26 people with no bodies intact? How do you do that? Well, some of you will probably be surprised. I hope nobody gets sick. But they would take a finger that they had. The pilot's finger had a ring on it. His finger had a ring. They identified him by that. They identified people from scars, that they had a scar on a part of their body. And of course they had the flight, I can't think of the word, manifest, that they knew who these people were and they were able to get the information from all of them. And they identified all 26 of those. Maybe they only had a finger, a partial face with some teeth that they were able to use dental records to identify. And then they took, where they had in the morgue set up there at the armory, they had so much body parts that they couldn't identify. So they would place them in with that identified part of the body to try to get an accurate weight of the person that was deceased and put it in a body bag. And that was basically how they identified those people. Very, very, very thorough that investigative team from the FBI did. That was their job. Now, I think now, instead of using them, I think each state has funeral directors that do that job instead of having to rely upon the FBI to do that. We were required to maintain security for 5 days, 24 hours a day. Box 13 had a disaster trailer that had heat and electricity, and we used that as a command center once we got that set up. Because it was March the 9th, we still had some snow on the ground, we had some cold weather. So we were able to use that, and the deputies manned the traffic scene for 5 days. The parts of the aircraft were removed. Dick Martin, you may help me remember this. I think the Air Force from Wright-Patterson came up and made the removal of the plane parts.
They took the parts down to the hangar down
Took
there.
the plane parts to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where they reconstructed what was left of that plane. And that took several days. And like I said, we had it for 5 days we had to do that. But my wife, for the first day or so, she provided sandwiches, and I don't know what else she provided for the law enforcement, the highway patrol, and all the other volunteers to see that they got fed. And that was in itself, besides having to take care of the prisoners at the jail, that was a big job to feed the people. And then the Red Cross stepped in, and they then took over the feeding of the volunteers that were there. Urbana Citizen, I think you were still located on South Main Street.
225 South Main.
Gomer Printing Building. That came to be the headquarters for all the news media, and they came in from everywhere. And surprisingly, back then, 99.9% of the news media were very congenial. They were very congenial. If you said, look, you can't go in there, they didn't cause you a lot of problems. They were very understanding, and they were very easy to get along with. Months after the plane crash, we would get calls at the sheriff's office, usually after a heavy rain. plane parts would be work their way to the surface. And that went on for several months. Eventually, the Air Force told us, dispose of them. We don't need any more, because they really, what they were getting were such small pieces of the plane, it really wasn't going to help them in their investigation. There was also human remains that showed up eventually over the next several months. Good old Doc Frederick was always very receptive to getting those parts, body parts. Never did have the courage to ask him what he did with them, but that was Doc's responsibility.
I remember it was a sunny morning. There was still snow on the ground from the recent snowfall. We got the call just before noon. Glenn Sloan, Sergeant at the Urbana Police Department. I'm sure many of you remember Glenn. He's the one that came down and told us about it, so I took a photographer with me and we grabbed all the film we had and drove out that way. We got there after you'd already set up your cordon around, so we sneaked around and came in off the side road.
That's the news media for you.
We ran through a snow-covered field, went over a fence and went into the woods. And it's basically like the picture showed. It was, the trees weren't green yet, but they were standing for the most part. There was a lot of smoke, still some burning piles of rubble. We shot every bit of film we had, and I sent Dave King, he was the sports editor taking pictures, sent him back to start the process at the newspaper office. We completely remade the paper that day. We delayed it for a couple hours so that we could get some pictures printed. I've still got the negatives we shot that day. As you can imagine, 99% of them you couldn't use. We didn't take time to discriminate about what we were shooting. We just shot everything in sight. And then the federal investigation people came and borrowed all those negatives. In fact, I looked like our negatives on that screen that you just showed. And they returned them though, so after all these years, I still got it. You're right about all the national media. I fielded phone calls from 3 o'clock in the afternoon until almost midnight from all over the world. It made major headlines. It was a nasty day. It was an exciting day. It was one of those things you think that a week later, how did we ever survive going through working 14, 16 hours a day on that?
Joe?
Well, I was the one who took the call from the fire department, so when I took the call, George Train was our assistant chief, and there was Bill Adams and myself, and we left, and I told people we would call sheriff's office, and St. Paris was out of our fire district, so we called St. Paris, and one thing I do remember, out and by there's a tree. Big tree there, it's probably about so round. And it's wrapped around on the inside of that tree was the winter coat for two of the hostesses that was on the plane. But kind of wrapped around the coat was part of the fuselage. I think it looked like part of the tail assembly, so. But it was nice. And then I helped Jim Harvey, who had the funeral home. So he called me, wanted me to know if he couldn't get anybody to go help him, so I went and worked in the field with him the next day. And picking up body parts and finding them. We did find one serviceman had his wallet and ID and everything wrapped up in like a plastic bag, like a small bag. And it was wrapped and we saw it's something sticking up, so we dug it out. But it was not a good thing. But, to have to witness it, so that's about all I have.
Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome.
I grew up in Piqua, and I was a freshman in high school, and one of the kids at the lunch table's dad was highway patrolman from the Piqua post.
Okay.
And he said for a long time his dad would not talk about it.
Well, that's right.
And finally he did. I can remember bits and pieces of the conversation. But he comes across the remains of a young mother and portions of her unborn child.
That's correct.
And he would not speak any further.
I don't know, you probably can't see this. One of the things, like I said, I was lucky we just had to take care of the traffic. One of the things the highway patrol had to do, if you, in this picture, you'll see round wooden stakes, or they're about 3 feet tall. They had to put a stake for every place that there was a body part on the ground there. And that's where they identified it. They photographed each body part after they got everything all staked off. But that was one of their responsibilities, is it was doing that. And like I said, I'm glad we didn't have to be involved in that.
One of the things that was so impressive was the professionalism and the effort that the FBI made as we brought in body pieces to match those up with who they thought those things were. Like say Roger mentioned, the pilot's half his hand was there, his wedding band was on. They made sure that got to the right bag, black bag we call them. But in such a short period of time, you walked into that armory and there were 30 tables set up, sawhorses, 4x8 sheets, body bags. I don't know where they got that many body bags that fast.
Melvin?
But what I remember was that's the first, I was on the fire department, that's the first magnesium I'd ever seen burn. And
Water wouldn't phase
water
it, would
would
it?
put it out, but when you sprayed water on it, just like the 4th of July.
Yeah.
We're under to talk about the DC-9. What about the Beechcraft? Did they both fall together in the same spot, or?
No.
No, there was probably the main portion of the Beechcraft probably came down 3/4 of a mile from where the DC-9 landed, or came into the contact with the ground. But there was a trail of debris where they first collided. The Beechcraft went down, and the TWA, because of their speed, I guess, traveled at additional distance. But there was quite a, probably 3/4 of a mile distance between the impact places. The Urbana Municipal Airport was very busy that next week, because various news media would fly in, the federal investigators flew in. Sometimes a couple of them flew in helicopters and lit in the field across the road from where the DC-9 was. So the whole community was really actually involved in this airplane crash. Now, thankfully to say, there were mistakes made, maybe took longer than it should have, but we were dealing back in a different time when we had limited resources. Today, like I've told people, it's going to happen. The only question is when. We will be faced with another major disaster. It will happen. Maybe not in our lifetime, but sometime it will happen. The county is much better prepared today to deal with that than what we were back in 1967. Because of the increase in law enforcement training, the equipment that the sheriff's office has, the police department, all the fire departments now have so much more equipment. We have a lot better rescue squad system than we did back in '67. So if and when it happens, we will definitely be better prepared to do that today than we were 49 years ago.
My name is Vicki Leonard Matthews. My dad was killed on that crash.
Oh.
I live in Springfield, did then, do now, born and raised there. It was a horrific day, but all of the news media and everything that's been out there, all of the work you're apologizing for how long it took. For those of us who were sitting home waiting, it really didn't seem like that long. I don't think any of us were sitting there wondering what the heck you were doing and why you weren't doing your job that you were supposed to be doing. At the 40th anniversary, when that article, when the sky fell, came out, I was notified by a friend here in Urbana that it was in the paper. And so I sent my son, who's in the air conditioning business, he was out on the road, made him come up here and buy a bunch of papers for me. Went down to the newspaper and bought some papers. From that, my husband and I commissioned a bronze plaque, which I don't know how many of you know hangs in the Grimes Airport, in the hangar right next door to the restaurant. And we did that in honor of everyone. And then that year on the 4th of July, which happens to be the year that the tornado came through and they canceled everything, but we all still showed up because there were people from all over. when we did that, I was able through, you guys all remember Dale Huffman at the Dayton Daily News, did all the articles and stuff. Through him, I was able to contact about 15 families who had lost someone in that crash. And through that, we had over 50 people at the airport that day, the day we dedicated the bronze plaque. I do want to say too that you guys have where the plane went down, there's a pond there. And they have never minded, I didn't make it this year, but almost every year on the 9th, I pull up their driveway and go back and throw flowers out into the pond. TWA did that pond for them after it happened. At least that's a story that was passed down to me. That they did. There was the huge hole, and TWA said, "What can we do for you?" And he said, "I've always wanted a pond," so they dug out a little bit more, made a nice pond. There's been trees and bushes and everything planted back there to the memorial bench to one of the family members from back there. And it's just really a very serene area now, and very nice memorial to go into. And so those of us who have visited, we thank you for allowing us to encroach on your property like we do when we drive back there just to visit the area. For those of us who lost someone, it's so wonderful to know that they haven't been forgotten. You all remember, you new folks that are just now learning about it. I think it's fantastic, and I'm so glad that you chose to do this. And I actually saw the article in the paper that I was able to come up. So.
Thank you for sharing that. Well, yeah. Well, I certainly thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you about this. I feel that with the resources that we had and the conditions, things went remarkably well. Everybody worked great together. City, county, township, state, federal, everyone, we were there for one cause, is to find out what happened and take care of that crash site, and everybody worked together. I would say today that if this would happen today, that it'll be handled because the resources are much more available with the various departments, and it would probably go maybe a little bit smoother. So I thank you for having me here. I have some newspaper clippings. If anyone wants to take a look at them, if you haven't seen them and want to read them, please make yourself at home to look at them. Thank you very much. God bless America.